Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. And tonight this is a continuation of what I did last week, talking about or inserting a video that I made over 20 years ago. Let's just put it that way, probably around 2003, 2004. I was a lead speaker at the UFO International UFO Congress, an event that's still going on today, and I was the lead speaker. And so I want you to see this and understand that, as I explained last week, I don't have to create new content relative to my theoretical work. I still have ongoing progress that I'm making with in literally a dozen fields that I work in, from archaeology to mathematics to physics to space physics to solar physics and so on. And I don't release a lot of that to the public. There's other venues that I release that in, and also communicating with professionals on those levels. But relative to what the public is basically able to understand, these videos show that what I was doing 25 years ago is consistent with what I'm doing today. And really, these draw from information that were presented to the scientific community, etc., back in the late 70s when I was at Cornell. So without further ado, take a look at this video from about 23 years ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement for you concerning the tape that you're about to watch. Due to unforeseen technical difficulties, approximately the first 19.5 minutes of video of this presentation was lost. There's a potential that this was due to sabotage because of the nature of the problem, which we eventually found and corrected. So shortly after the introduction of this tape, the complete audio of the presentation will be on the tape, but you'll have a blank screen for about 19.5 minutes. When the video does come back on, however, you will see all of the additional slides and graphics and text and additional information that was part of the presentation. None of this information was lost during this first 19 minutes. Again, we greatly apologize for this error, but the information is fully contained on the tape that you are about to see and listen to. Thank you. We're about to start part 2, our second presentation on Planet X Day. It is our great pleasure to bring you Professor James McCanney. I just want to say a few words. You know, it is absolutely wonderful that we have hard scientists now that are willing to take a look at these phenomena, at these potentials for good or for ill. So we're going to really enjoy this presentation. Please give a warm welcome to Professor James McCanney.
Sit down, just so we're not distracted. Thank you. I just want to mention I've done probably 30 radio shows with Mark Hazelwood. I do find it, like Mark says, amusing that people say we are aligning as if something were very bad about that and we're setting up forces against other people. That's rather comical. I worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of people in my career. Mark, I'm finding, is an evolving person. He's very articulate. Certainly a person who is cast in this role. It's certainly not something he planned on doing, as he said. But at any rate, like I say, I've done many radio shows with Mark and really appreciate his aspect of this entire topic. So with that in mind, I want to make a couple quick announcements. I'm doing my radio show live from the Flamingo Hotel. I don't have a location yet. That's Thursday night, 9 o'clock Eastern time, so we're West Coast. That would be 6 o'clock here, correct? And like I said, I don't have a location, but we'll probably have some interesting guests. It's an hour-long show. And once again, if you have time to go visit that show, it's also archived, so you don't have to listen exactly at that time. At realityradionetwork.com, and my own website also usually has the archives updated on my website, jmcannyscience.com. And so with those brief announcements in mind, I also invite you to go to some of the radio archive shows that I've been on. Specifically, some of the best ones were, for example, on the Alex Merklinger show, Mysteries of the Mind. And the thing about this topic of Planet X, it's so enormous that, for example, on a particular show, we might get into the aspect of multiple objects coming in at one time and being drawn off, as we know this has happened in the past. So, you know, this is an extremely complicated topic. I invite you to go and search out those archived shows. I would hope to have a list on my website at some point, but anybody will be able to lead you to those shows. I was on a show last summer, Lou Gentili's show, which is a nationally syndicated show. And Lou is on AM now, and I believe also shortwave. But anyway, he's national. And in the middle of the show, NASA called up. Their phone was ringing off the hook. And I always find it comical when some people go, well, has NASA ever heard of McCanney? And they go, no, never heard of him. And they call into the middle of the radio show that I'm on and promise to send a representative of NASA. And I understand that the phones were literally ringing off the hook in Washington. So they called from the administrative office. The head of NASA called the Lou Gentili show last July 14th. So I invite you to listen to that show. That's archived. It's one of the most listened to shows. That's L-O-U-G-N-T-I-L-E, Lou Gentili. It's on the internet. And lo and behold, at exactly the same time, NASA released a story to the British Broadcasting Corporation. Now, why would NASA release this story to the BBC? There's an interesting aspect to how they release and where they release. But at any rate, at exactly the same time, they released a story that said that there was a large asteroid imminent to crash into Earth in the year 2019. Had anybody heard that story? Yeah, and you know what that was in direct response to my being on the Lou Gentili show. So they have these canned things that are set up, total disinformation, and I was able to dissect that right on the show as Lou read it off the air. He was reading it off the ticker tape while we were on the air after NASA called in and promised to send a representative. So at any rate, the piece of information given to the BBC was total misinformation. NASA does not have the ability to either measure exactly the position and velocity of an asteroid to the exactitude in which it could ever predict 19 years in advance. It can't predict 3 months in advance with the computers it has. With the satellites that go out amongst the planets, they're constantly recalculating as the things go out. But they had to get a story out to grab the front page headlines because basically I was making national news. So has NASA ever heard of Jim McCanny? Their answer is no. I guess, anyway, just wanted to mention that. Today what I'm going to go into is somewhat a history of myself, and I encourage you, I don't want to repeat what's in my book, because a lot of you have read it. The book is available. I now have a second book. My first book is called Planet X, Comets and Earth Changes. The copyrights in that book span back to the 1970s, when I did my original work on exactly this topic of large objects coming into the solar system. And that's something I'm going to kind of initiate here. Instead of using the term Planet X, because that seems to designate one thing, one object, and if this object comes by and misses us, then we're good to go. Totally incorrect. And so I want to move the definition of what we're talking about to another term. I want to call the topic the search for extra solar system objects, because that's exactly what we're dealing with here. There's not one. In fact, when these guys come in, just like Hale-Bopp, it had a companion. In fact, there's evidence that Hale-Bopp had many little companions also. And they are smaller astrological or astronomical objects, celestial objects. And there's also something very specific. When this big guy comes in, which we have information from ancients, including the Hopi Indians, who are local here pretty much, that the Hale-Bopp was known about to them in their ancient legends, and that was, some people call it the blue Kachina, and the red one is the big guy coming in 10 years later. So if you look at that, we may be on a pattern, according to them, of Hale-Bopp coming in being the precursor, the forerunner, so to speak, of the big guy. And so there's these things bring in a whole entourage of objects they have collected out there. And they're in orbit that's like a mini solar system coming in and moving through ours, if you can imagine that. So some of these objects might be very loosely bound and be the size of Earth. And when they come in as a large a group of objects orbiting each other, and just like a small solar system. And as they move through, some of these extraneous objects can be pulled off by Jupiter or Saturn or Neptune or even Earth and thrown into other orbits, and these could be the dangerous ones. Now, I said the topic of Planet X is extremely complicated. Sometimes we have to rely on ancient texts. One of the more reliable ancient texts on Earth today is called the Cobran Bible. Very exclusive book. I've managed to get text from that. That was a text that was kept by a man named Joseph of Arimathea. He's the guy that raised Christ after Joseph, his father that we know, Joseph from the Bible, died. And they had to move to basically England. And basically we believe that it was in Scotland, but the Cobran Bible was kept in its purest form by these people, and it's a very tightly kept group of documents. And the part where they talk about the destroyer coming in, it's very clear that it was not Planet X, the big guy that caused the damage to Earth last time. It was a companion of the big guy. So I put together a scenario, and I've always believed, after studying Velikovsky, and I'm a person who has studied Velikovsky in extreme detail. The reference is something most astronomers have never done, especially the ones that are critical of Velikovsky. And what became very clear to me is that there was not one comet when Velikovsky was talking about Venus coming into the solar system and ravaging Earth. There was not one comet. There was at least more than one comet. And I've got a picture that I'll show here of the cover of my first book, Planet X, Comets and Earth Changes, which shows some figures. It's a Native American Indian rock painting from Green River, Utah, but it shows two huge comets. One characteristically has the nucleus drawn. And these are two big comets, and they both have squiggly sunward spikes.
which is indicative of an electric current moving in a high magnetic field. And this is incorporated in with my science work, explaining what comets really are. They are not dirty snowballs. They are a complex, extremely complex plasma interaction of these rocky objects that come into the solar system at random. They're out there, they're part of our solar system, and as they come in, they break what I call the solar capacitor. And when we saw Hale-Bopp come in, for example, both Hale-Bopp, the big guy, the nucleus, and the companion erupted into these giant comets, and the smaller one was whipping around the big one. NASA completely shut down the information, and the largest comet in known history, specifically in scientific history, NASA has never released any of the data and claims they never took a single picture of that with the Hubble Space Telescope. Is there anybody on this planet that believes that? Well, I had a friend back in the 90s, a good friend, and I don't communicate with him much anymore. I had a webpage called the Millennium Group. My science work was the core of that group. We were getting 3 million hits a month on that webpage. A little bit of interest. And we also had the ability at the time to backtrack and get the email address of the person who was searching. We had an engine on there that did that. 50% of the traffic was coming from the CIA, the NSA, Harvard, MIT. Had they ever heard of Jim McCanney? No. But when it came time for them to steal part of my theory, which was the prediction that there would be X-rays to the sunward side of comets, then that was fair game. It was described by Discover magazine as one of the top 10. Of course, Discover has the top 100 scientific discoveries of the year. Of the top, then they picked 10 of the top ones to be the top 10. Well, anyway, the discovery of X-rays to the sunward side of comets was aired as being one of the top, if not the top, discovery of that year. And I know the guys at Goddard who put their names up there. I don't respect them for doing that. And I know that there was the young guy that did it, Kerry Liss, know him personally, was told not to mention my name in his papers. So all the published papers, all the information they gave to Discover magazine, all of the scientific meetings, which I went to and was not allowed to talk at, never mentioned my name, or the papers that I wrote in 1979, which predicted this as part of my comet model. Why would they do that? Because they would have to admit, first, comets are not dirty snowballs. And what person in this room is going to believe that you're going to have X-rays coming off an ice ball that's out there slowly melting, let alone 30,000 miles out to the sunward side where there's really nothing? My model predicts exactly that phenomenon, and we'll talk about it here when I get into some of the science information. But at any rate, the point is that when these objects come in, they come in multiples. There's not just one. And there's not just one planet X. So I want to change the discussion topic here. Planet X still has to be used. It's a historical name. It describes objects that are big that we have not named yet. It sometimes is referred to the tenths. The X means the Roman numeral 10. Well, we've pretty much got more than 10 now, so that's not, accurate. But so the planet X is a term that's used loosely, is what I'm saying. And in the case of this specific big object that we're thinking is coming in right now, coming out of the southern hemisphere, possibly out of the constellation Centaurus from the southeast, only visible during the month of May from a very narrow latitude on this planet, basically New Zealand and the southern area of Patagonia in South America. Just from a strange configuration of our planet, the way it's tilted, the way it goes around the sun, the turn of the seasons, the fact that the South Pole is in daylight for most of the year during our winter months, their summer. So there's a very small window of viewing opportunity, and the people at NASA knew this. Harrington knew it. His papers, internal NASA documents, document when they finally located Planet X. He was emphatic. He said, I know right where it is now, because they finally saw Neptune and Uranus, the two far planets in our solar system, being pulled down. He said, it's got to be big, and it's got to be down there. And I've heard people say, oh, well, we've changed the masses of the planets, we've corrected, and now we understand why those movements occurred. Well, that's baloney, because changing the mass of the planets in the planetary motion equations does not do anything relative to allowing the planets to move down. That would only allow them to move differently in the plane of the planets where they live and move. So Harrington knew, and he knew so exactly where it was that he was going to use an 8-inch astrograph. It's a high precision camera pointed at a particular area of the sky, and he wasn't going to even look anyplace else. And he was going to do a blink photographic session from New Zealand and return. Well, Dr. Harrington died before he finished his work, and his equipment was returned, and nobody else did that work, we are told. Now, an 8-inch telescope in 1991, if he could see it, and he knew he would be able to see it with that telescope, camera, whatever you want to call it, that's an 8-inch, that's this big. We're not talking professional grade equipment. And the trick is, people ask, well, why hasn't anybody seen this? Well, first of all, you've got the disinformation, people pointing in the wrong direction, have everybody looking in the wrong direction. And the other thing is, there's only a couple very small places. If you look at the base of our planet from the South Pole, it's all ocean. Do it sometime. Pick up a globe, take it out of the mount, look at the bottom side. It's all ocean except for the finger of South America that comes down there, Patagonia, and New Zealand. They're the only locations, excuse me, where you can see this object coming in. So the only people that know about it are the people with good equipment in those locations and have known that that's where you have to look. But I think what's going to happen soon, I personally now have equipment in both those locations, and I know for a fact that the CIA, which lives on top of the layer of NASA, they're going nuts because they can't find my equipment in South America. The people in New Zealand are public, so they already know, and they're already harassing them. But the other equipment, they can't find. So that information has its way back to you, is what I'm saying. And so around we've already had viewing sessions, the equipment's ready. And so by February, sometime in February, possibly March, it's a very strange opportunity for this one area to see that part of the sky, because the Antarctica will still be mainly, up until March 21st, Antarctica will still be highly illuminated from the sun. So at any rate, this is ongoing. This is some research that's ongoing. So at any rate, I just wanted to clarify a few things. There's not just one Planet X. And if this thing comes through and misses us, like Hale-Bopp did, not many people know that when NASA knew about Hale-Bopp long before '95 when Alan Hale and Bopp, I don't know his first name, the Japanese guy, when they discovered Hale-Bopp, NASA knew about it long before that. And they knew from their studies that Hale-Bopp was at that time on a very near collision course with Earth. And what happened in the meantime is something they didn't understand. They still don't understand because they're watching this new Planet X object coming in, and it's moving, and we're getting the feedback. We know their astronomers are looking at it, and it's not moving according to plan. And that is explained in my theoretical work as the tail drag. As the tail drags on these objects, on these huge objects as they come in, it turns out that the bigger ones have more erratic orbits, and the ancients called them the lawless ones. And I hope I have time to get into the Mayan calendar and recalendarization. My new book, by the way, which is a pamphlet, and I've kept this small and short. It's called Surviving Planet X Passage. The main topic in there talks directly about the Earth changes that we know happen from historical records and which are explained by my scientific theories, which are related to comets being not dirty snowballs, but very energetic plasma effects. And the British journalist who was just talking about all of these scientists being drawn off their regular projects to study the Earth's magnetic field, I have an entire chapter in my first book on the structure of the magnetic field, how it works, the myths, both in the organized astronomy community and on the internet web pages about the myths about our magnetic field. And so the entire Earth changes scenario will be explained in there. And I also go through a hypothetical Earth flip. And there are two types of pole shifts. One is a core precessional shift like a top, as this object comes by and its gravitational field interacts with the core of our planet. It actually causes the precessional rate of the core of the Earth, which is the majority of matter, the majority of our angular momentum and spin momentum in the planet, causes that to shift. But while that's happening, the mantle shifts over the top of that. So you get a duality, two types of pole shifts. And it's the surface shift which causes the mountain building and the earthquakes. And then as that realigns with the core has been spinning in pretty much the same direction. The mantle picks up, and that's where you get the oceans moving over. And you have to understand, all this is taking place while we are being flooded, while we have an influx of hydrocarbons from this vast comet tail, and also the winds, the storms. My work has now evolved into weather prediction. In 1999, I was predicting storms 6 months in advance because of planetary alignments. There's no longer any question. It's absolutely, positively verified scientifically that planetary alignments affect our weather. November 9th, we had a huge storm system that I watched from inception that moved from about mid-United States eastward, and as Venus moved around from an inferior conjunction, and our very own moon, moved out of a new moon phase and let that normal solar wind, not a flare, the normal solar wind was now allowed to pass to us again from beyond Venus. When that hit, it drove that storm into a fury. We had tornadoes across the entire United States, and this happened at night. So where was the energy input to cause that storm to excite to that level? We also saw a tremendous amount of water influx into that storm. That water came from up there. There was no known source in the central United States to cause more water to build into that storm to the level that it did. When Hurricane Floyd moved across, missed Florida, and it came up the coastline, it dumped what I call the equivalent of a Lake Superior volume of water up the East Coast. Severe flooding. And this is just one storm. And I'm going to show a picture here that when Floyd formed, that was one of the storms I predicted, that on that day, September 6th, 1999, I had predicted the May previous that that day would be a very excited time for hurricanes in the Atlantic. And the reason was because of a very little comet called Comet Lee that I had been watching. It was a new comet, but it had a very unusual set of circumstances. And when I pulled up the orbit, Mercury, Venus, Earth's moon, Earth, Comet Lee, which at the time was up and behind us, and Mars were all aligned. And now these are not gravitational alignments that we're talking about. Gravitational alignments, that whole thing has been overplayed. There's nothing to it because we are basically in space weightless with respect to all of the other planets. And that's kind of a complicated topic, but electrically, we were lining up. And I said, whoa, this is bad news. And so on that day, September 6, 1999, as the alignment occurred, the solar flares began, and we had 5 hurricanes form in the Atlantic at one time. And I've got a picture of it here. Hope to get to that in a little while. So at any rate, what I'm saying is that I want to go through the standard theories that we are told are true in normal scientific community or through NOAA, the National Weather National Weather Organization, NOAA, or National Weather Service, some people call it. First of all, I want to say comets are not dirty snowballs. Never were, never will be. And when we go out and look at little comets, the astronomers are fooled. Because first of all, their spacecraft are not built to observe what they're observing. They're built to go out and see an ice ball that's deliquescing in the, or sublimating in the solar wind. So what do you think they see? Dirty snowballs. But they're missing all of the data points where they have to look to see what's really going on. And oddly, by coincidence, they mistakenly have observed other parts of the true comet model, this electrical discharge. And so with that, I'm going to kind of talk through the slides here. I'll start those in a minute. But let me just go through the basics. You've been told that comets are dirty snowballs and that they melt away and go away. Well, the little comets that we have seen and normally see in our solar system from a distance fit that model. That model was first projected by Kepler when he realized that comets were outside of the orbit, because Aristotelian theory said that the comets were atmospheric phenomena up in our, something burning in our atmosphere. But Kepler, with his new understanding of celestial motion, realized they were out there. So at any rate, back in the 50s, and I want to mention the name Velikovsky here, is because that is when he wrote his books, Earth in Collision, Earth in Upheaval, and Ages in Chaos, and they hit the press, and they were going bonkers. They were literally selling all over the world in millions. The press went to the astronomy community and said, well, you're saying that everything Velikovsky is saying is wrong. What do you say? Tell us what's true. Well, you know, in 1950, the astronomy community did not have a sound story on any of this, so they had to scramble. That's when Fred Whipple was at Harvard, young guy, and he advanced further the concept of at that time they called it the ice ball comet model. Well, it's become the dirty snowball comet model, and now it's become the really dirty snowball comet model because there's no ice on them. They know from close-up photographs that there ain't no ice there, there's no water, they got a hot, dry rock. And I'll get into that in a little bit here. When they got to Halley's, the same thing. There was no ice on it. They saw these things gushing out, and they didn't understand what they were looking at. So at any rate, comets are not dirty snowballs. Well, if they're not going away, what are they? And when I was 1979 to 81, I had the opportunity as an introductory level instructor. I happened to be at Cornell University. And this is before NASA realized they had to keep the lid on data so people like me would not get their hands on it and interpret it differently. So basically, I realized that the spacecraft that were going out to Venus, Jupiter, Saturn were sending back data that were matching my theoretical work regarding electric fields, magnetic fields. Something very different was going on in outer space than what we were told. The planets obviously were not formed all at one time. When they went to Jupiter, they expected to see a cold, ice-ridden planet. Well, far from it. They saw a dynamic planet with a red spot, with a storm, a hurricane that had been there for at least 300 years. They saw electrical phenomena. They saw discharges of millions and millions of amps flowing between Io, this innermost moon, to the planet. And they derived, and I sat there in meetings as I watched these people off the cuff go, well, maybe that's what's going on. And those ideas stuck. Somehow got into the medium, got into papers, and now they are quoted as being standard theory. But I watched as these guys pull this stuff out of their hip pocket, did not have a clue what was going on, and now it's quoted as being standard fare in the scientific space science community. Nobody goes in and really thinks about this stuff. Well, I had the opportunity to be there at a time when all this was happening, and I saw it firsthand. So I realized the planets didn't form all at one time. And comets were not dirty snowballs. I realized that comets were, in fact, building up matter. They were attracting matter in by strong electrical forces. So comets, the little ones, now don't have enough gravitational attraction to hold the stuff they draw in, so it then blows out in the solar wind, and that's what the astronomers are looking at when they send out a space probe. They get back in that tail area, and they look around, they go, yep, there it's coming. Must be coming off the nucleus. Well, it's not. It's just that the nucleus doesn't have enough mass to hold it. The big comets do. And now I'll tell you something. Hale-Bopp, when it came in, was about half the size of our moon. The nucleus, when it went out, and it's still on its way out, very visible, is about the size of our moon. It grew to become a planet. Hale-Bopp is the newest member of our solar system. But NASA never took a picture of it. I don't understand that whole concept and what they plan to gain by this. But at any rate, so now the statement has been made that gravity is the main force that controls our solar system. Well, as we speak, NASA is watching a big object coming into our solar system. They monitored Hale-Bopp for a 9-year period and knew that it was not obeying gravity. Something else was going on. But they didn't want to talk about it. It was doing something they didn't understand, so they just put the lid on it. But what was going on was dragging in the tail material, and it's a variable thing. It's not the same all the time. So that's why it seems to slow down from its normal orbit and then sometimes pick up, because then it goes according to normal gravitational laws, and then it slows down, and this process is going on. And the point I wanted to make about Hale-Bopp was that it slowed down about 3 full months worth of time from the time it came in and around the sun. From the time they first saw it, probably in 91, 92, when they knew it was on a collision course with Earth, to the time that it was then passing around the sun in 96, or was it 97 perihelion? I think it was maybe 96. But at any rate, it had slowed down in 3 months, and in that time, Earth had moved ahead 3 months in its orbit. So we missed that thing by a lot. But you could see the daily churning of the sun as that thing worked its way through the solar system. And I have a picture of Hale-Bopp here, a couple of them that I'll show you on the slide presentation. So I want to quick go down a list of the theories that I had to build to explain things. I want to mention, too, that in the 1986, when Halley's Comet came through, a group of professional astronomers went to South America with spectrometers, and their goal was to measure the spectrum of Comet Halley. And anyway, they did, and what they realized that everything was redshifted. That data was never published. I was in the meeting when the data came in. That's how I know about it. That's the only reason I know about it, and that data was scuttled because it didn't fit the standard theory. Well, why was there a redshift in a comet? Well, the reason is because there's another source of redshift. There's a guy named Halton Arp who spent his life photographing quasars that are attached physically in every physical branch of the electromagnetic spectrum: radio, visible, ultraviolet, X-ray. You can see the same string attaching the quasar to a galaxy, and the redshift of the quasar is suggesting that it's at the edge of the universe, and we know that the galaxy is very near us. So how could this be? There's another source of redshift, and I have actually discovered what this is. I have experimental laboratory verification. I call it the induced electric dipole redshift. What happens when an electron is in a non-uniform electric field, the positron and electron separate, and it causes an induced dipole force. The induced dipole force is always attractive. Therefore, you always get a redshift as this photon moves out from the central electric field. So comets produce redshifts. It's proof of two things. There's another source of redshift, and the comets are highly electric, have high electric non-uniform fields, meaning they're a point source, high electric field, and all of this goes together. So now you people are here to talk about UFOs, and that's the main thrust of this conference. And I want to tell you something that I did. This occurred in the early 80s. I realized that the solar fusion model had to be incorrect. The solar core could not be the source of fusion. And the Russians, once they translated my work and understood it, did a very interesting experiment. They took an X-ray detector, which was sensitive to wavelength, and they scanned it across the sun. And as they scanned from the edge, obviously the core is in here, here's the atmosphere. As they scanned inwards, they would start to pick up the X-rays coming off the core. But what they realized is as they got into the center of the sun and subtracted off what they knew was coming from the atmosphere, the core X-rays were cooler, not hotter. They were cooler. And they said what they detected was a very cool core somewhere down in the sun. So my prediction that the solar fusion activity was at the surface was basically confirmed. You will never hear that in this country. The other thing that convinced me that there had to be a new model for solar fusion was that both Jupiter and Saturn were actively undergoing fusion. When the Voyager spacecraft flew by both Jupiter and Saturn, they could see the proton winds coming up off the surface. And it's mentioned in fine print back in the science issues, back in the when I forget what years those were, 79 to 81, somewhere in there. And they just let it go. Now, there should not be a proton wind coming off of either of those planets for any reason other than they're undergoing fusion. One of my main predictions was that the sun would have surface fusion, and that was the cause of excess current of protons coming off of the sun, which was the basis of my model. When I first started studying comets, I knew they were electrically charged. I knew they were interacting with the sun, but I didn't know how the sun was producing this large capacitor. And I later realized that it had to be because there was an excess current of protons coming off the sun. And the way this happens is the sun is a superatom. It's positively charged slightly under the surface, and you have a sea of electrons moving around it in a superatom structure. And I want you to listen carefully to this because this comes into play in a model that I developed for an electromagnetic propulsion system, 1982. So anyway, it was very clear that both Jupiter and Saturn were small stars, were involved in fusion, were generating their own heat. We know for a fact that Saturn puts out 3 times more energy than it receives from the sun. How is it doing this? It has ongoing fusion in its atmosphere, and it's more active than Jupiter is. So a very interesting thing happened. The Marconi oscillators, which were on the Voyager spacecraft, which set up the oscillating signal for the radio signal that transmits the data back to Earth, as it got to Jupiter, that frequency went red. The wavelength got longer. And as it passed by Jupiter, the wavelength went back to normal. And so they said, oh, this must be due to the gravitational field of Jupiter. Well, Jupiter does not have sufficient gravitational field to cause the general relativistic wavelength shift, not by any stretch of the imagination. And I said, okay, my prediction is when you get to Saturn, let's watch the Marconi oscillator. It's going to go down more, even though Saturn is smaller, so it's going to prove your theory incorrect. You know what happened to that data? Never surfaced, because it did exactly what I was saying. It proved that both Jupiter and Saturn had ongoing fusion. They were creating a non-uniform electric field. One of my early papers that was published in the scientific journals deals with Saturn and the spokes in Saturn's rings, and it actually predated the passage of Voyager by Saturn and talked about the fact that there would have to be spokes, basically shadows of comet tails moving around the rings as these big ring particles turned into comets and drew the material in as they moved around through the rings. And I also predicted that the rings were not a steady state, like they said, all this material from the origin of the solar system. They had to be an ongoing dynamic system, being driven by material coming in from the outside at a constant rate. At any rate, this led to something, and I said, what if you could take this model of fusion and put it in a jar on your table? And so I started building the model. And I began to realize at the time that this is what the UFOs are driven by. And I took the model to venture capitalists in California, who hooked me up with a company called McDonnell Douglas, which is now Consortium. But at that time, it was called McDonnell Douglas. And I went in with a group of people who were looking for venture capital. And basically, this was routed into McDonnell Douglas. They took my plans and then gave me a contact who was supposed to contact me. And there was supposed to be private money coming in from an organization called Rubanis and Associates out of LA, a venture capital group. the money never came to me. The money was infused directly into McDonnell Douglas. They took the idea and basically pushed me out of the whole deal. But essentially, here's how that propulsion system worked. And it's based on my understanding of how the planets worked, and something that has later become known as cold fusion, but there they were trying different processes using chemicals. Here's what happens. You take a glass cylinder, you fill it full of hydrogen and deuterium, and you put two electrodes, one at the top and one at the bottom. Basically, when you run a high electrical current through there, it splits the atoms of hydrogen. It'll do this to the small atoms. The bigger atoms are too heavily bound, for my understanding, to split them apart. But what happens is the nuclear forces will loosely bind into a super nucleus with the electrons moving around exactly like the sun. And what you do simply then is you take another tube and you tap into the electron cloud and you put another tube into the nucleus and you have a battery. An extremely powerful battery. And then what you do is you run the tubes around the outside of a gyro-stabilized disk, and the current has to, it's a very unusual configuration because the current flow of electrons has to be around in the same direction in both sets of tubes. And the other, to complete the current, you run the other section of current over the skin of the spacecraft. It's gyro-stabilized. You have a set of spinning wheels in the middle of the disk. And basically, that's how you power a flying saucer. And I was here last night, and it was very interesting to see the equations they were drawing, talking about the surface models. And that's exactly what this deals with, a superatom with a surface that is basically a battery which you tap into. And it follows the same model of fusion that I had created for the sun. So, at any rate, all of this works together in, I would say, in harmony. This whole subject that the solar system was created all at one time and nothing is going to happen again is not true. Comets are not dirty snowballs. That's not true. Everything, if you go down the list of theories that they're teaching in the universities today, not a single one of them is correct. And this all started back when Velikovsky wrote his books, and the astronomy community had to come up with a pat answer for how all of this worked. So before the space race, the space probes ever went out, they had their pat answers as to how all of this should work. And so there was no room for someone to come in and rewrite this in the middle, as I had done. So I started publishing my work, 1979, 1980, 81. Standard journals were publishing it. They were amazed. They were going, my God, look at this. This is totally new, totally different. And all of a sudden, I lost my job, I got blackballed, and I've since never been able to publish again. Have they ever heard of Jim McCanny? Yes, because whenever I wait 3-4 years and see a new editor pop on the scene, I can usually get something going with them, something like that, but eventually the old guard comes in and shuts it down. So I've literally been unable to publish any of this for a period of almost probably 25 years now. So at any rate, a lot of this is contained in my book. And you don't need a PhD to understand this, to understand there's a certain working of the universe. There's certain things that are going on out there. And the thing that always amazes me is why are we not pursuing what is really known to be true? Why are we hanging on to things that are not true? And why are we in a situation where we're now on the verge of possibly seeing a Planet X type of object move into this solar system? There's probably nobody more critical of the space program than me. And I must say that I'm sure I felt as bad as everybody else the other day when the Columbia broke apart. It's my belief that NASA should not even be flying. That is not the way to go into space. Chemical rockets are not the way to go into space. We will never get out of low Earth orbit with chemical rockets. There's another way, and the thing about the electromagnetic propulsion system is, now you go back to the wider scale of the universe. Obviously, the galactic nuclei are pumping out protons just like the sun. And there are return currents, and there are currents flowing all over outer space. They're flowing in our solar system. They're flowing intergalactically. We see quasars attached to galactic nuclei. And you know what you can do with an electromagnetic propulsion system? You can ride those currents like you would ride on a riverboat. That is how you move around out there. All of this is coming together. So, at any rate, I think I'll go to the slideshow here. And if I could have the slides, please. Okay, sun, our sun. Is it going bonkers today? I like when Mark said that. It is absolutely going nuts. And I've heard recently, I found it cute, March 21st of 2002, just about a year ago, NASA scientists published a release saying, whew, the sun is finally calming down. We're expecting it to diminish now in this, this carryover of whatever it was. So this is 2 years into the supposed minimal going into the solar minimum, as 2000 was the solar maximum. No such thing. The sun is at an accelerated rate right now. Sometimes it'll quiesce and quiet for a couple days and then boom. I mean, to see these flares, we are very, very lucky that space is as big as it is. And these flares, some of them have come around, actually looped around behind us and hit us and caused bad weather. But if we get hit by some of these big flares, believe me, you're going to know it. You're not going to have electricity. It's going to take this planet to its knees. These are enormous flares. They're very unusual. And this just happens to be a picture, an average picture of the sun, as seen in, I believe, X-ray. These are from the SOHO satellite. And it's interesting to note that NASA just very quickly put up a satellite to monitor the sun, the increased energy output of the sun. Now, the point I want to make is that we look at the sun, but what we cannot see is the electric activity of the sun. The electrical energy coming off the sun is hundreds of thousands times, millions of times, billions of times more than the visible light energy that we consider to be our source of energy. The thing is, the Earth is very much buffered from this by a large magnetic field and other structures as we move around the sun. But when a large comet comes in, breaks the solar capacitor, and starts interacting with the sun electrically, this pumps up the sun, and we get this type of exaggerated activity. Last May, I noticed the sun, even though it was at a heightened level of energy, I noticed that it really took off all of a sudden last May. And I'm going, whoa, what was this? And it kept going up and up and up. And clearly, if you understand that fusion is a surface phenomenon, comets can interact with it. We've seen comets come through flares and ignite them. The largest flare ever to come off the sun was ignited by a comet moving through a flare. And it was a pair of comets, a most unusual configuration. And my opinion is that that pair of comets was a shot over the bow. You know what a shot over the bow is? Used in the military to kind of give you a warning. I think that's what that was. And the idea was, look what we can do. We can aim these puppies. And I know from my personal contacts, because people come out and contact me from very high levels, security levels in this country. And they say, you're doing the right thing. You know, we're watching you. So I know, like Mark says, there's a group of people who really don't like me. I guess that's life in a big city, huh? But there are people who are also have told them that if you mess with this guy, we're going to mess with you. So there's a war going on up high on these levels of people who want information out, and there's people who don't want it out. But at any rate, the sun last May went bonkers. It's been going bonkers ever since. I'm going to pull up the next slide, and I'm going to try and run through these rather quickly. It's supposed to change. Could I have a slide, please? Let me see. It's not advancing. Nikki? Let's see. This is going to be unfortunate if we don't get these slides. Okay, I think I know what to do here. Where's my cursor? No. Now the mouse is not here.
Okay, just keep talking.
Okay. No, we need those. Oh, there's the mouse. Okay, that's okay. Just leave it now. Okay, so that was one. Okay, we're back to okay, this, I'm going to go through these rapidly. This is a picture of another star. It's called the nebula is called the Eskimo Nebula. And this is what our star would look like if you went way away and looked back at it. And all the stars look like this that are undergoing this proton wind. Now, at the very center, you see a dot. And that dot is probably the size of our entire solar system. The glow from the star with the dust and gases around it. So this is a very huge phenomenon. And now look around there. What do you see around there? They look like comets, don't they? That's exactly what they are. They are objects in the far, far reaches of that solar system that are forming, probably not even visible to the people that live in that solar system. But we can see them because we can see this scattered light. Now, they're primarily nitrogen and oxygen, helium, hydrogen. And so basically, they're making water planets out there. Something like Neptune and Uranus are very obviously objects that were made. And as those objects form, part of their motion allows the tail drag allows them to drop in and become part of the solar system. So this is what our solar system looks like from a distance. There are many Planet X type objects out there. And some of them have gotten in, and there's evidence from the ancient Egyptians that these things come in, there's at least one. They've named, how many names are there for Nibiru? Many, many, many names that come down to us from the ancients. The Mayans called it Quetzalcoatl, but Quetzalcoatl was relative to Venus, not Planet X. And there's many other tales from the ancients that say that it was not the big guy that did the damage. It was the companion, which in this case was Venus, in our case, Velikovsky's story. So at any rate, this is what our solar system looks like at a distance. Now, if you go in the inner part of that solar system, I want you to imagine the sun blowing off a proton wind, positive charged particles. It's holding back a big nebular cloud, and you can see that nebular cloud here. That's the source of the comet tail material, one of the sources. Now, what happens when an object moves into that capacitor, everybody has seen the backyard bug killer thing work, right? The zapper. And what happens is that there's an electric field, a high voltage electric field, and as the bug flies in there, the bug is the same size, but electrically the bug carries in the potential, the electrical potential from the outside grid, which in that case is at ground, and the high voltage grid is in the middle. And so it flows in at ground potential, and it's like sticking your finger in there. The bug has carried that electrical potential in with it, and so basically it's kind of formed a finger electrically into that capacitor, and bam, it discharges. Where does it discharge? At the location of the bug. It doesn't discharge up over here someplace. It discharges where the bug is. And that's the exact same thing that happens when a chunk of rock big or small, comes into our solar system from a distance. It discharges that capacitor and forms a comet. Now, the part of the comet we don't see is the electrical current of electrons, because electrons have 1/2000th the mass of a proton, and they're hundreds of times less massive than dust particles or other molecules. So the electrons move the fastest in this electrical discharge, and they create the entire, just about 99% of the electrical current flow is in the form of electrons coming out from the sun. And when it hits the cloud, the initial cloud of the comet, it interacts with them and it causes a thing called bremsstrahlung X-rays. It caused me in 1979 to make a prediction that would prove conclusively that comets could not be dirty snowballs. This was discovered in 1996. They were totally amazed, but yet comets are still dirty snowballs. And no mention of my theoretical work at all. But anybody can see that with this electron current coming in from the sun, that as it began to interact with the comet atmosphere out there, those electrons would slow down, and they were also seeing the electric field of the comet itself and cause a thing called bremsstrahlung X-rays. And there are other types of X-rays associated with comets, but that's the primary type. So at any rate, let me move on. And I think it's important to kind of give you a vision of our solar system from a distance. That's one of the more important things I want to leave you with. Okay. This is a picture of Comet Hale-Bopp. And it was taken by an astronomer in Florida through what is known as a swan filter. And now the picture of Hale-Bopp you're typically, or a comet that you're normally used to seeing, is the long, white coma, and maybe a nice roundish tail with the dust tail, they call that, with the type 2 tail, which is the thinner type 2, like thinner tail. Anyway, this is a picture of a comet, a big comet. Now remember that NASA didn't want to tell you, but the size of the nucleus in there is half the size of our moon. These tentacles that you see are strictly water. Now, it's not just any water. It's triply ionized oxygen on the water molecule, and it's doubly ionized hydrogen. You know what kind of energy you need to do that? This is not sublimating off a nice little melting snowball. This is high energy stuff. It has X-rays coming out of it. The tentacles, I made an estimate, there's probably 2 to 3 million amperes of current flowing in each one of those tentacles. That picture, I believe, has 17. And when you look at the real-time video through one of these filters, those tentacles are out there like this. They're waving around like big snake tails. Now, if we would have gone through Hale-Bopp, if we would have been 3 months earlier in our orbit, we would have been literally flooded. This Earth would have taken on a tremendous amount of pollution in the form of water, hydrocarbons, and what the ancients talk about, the rain of brimstone and fire, the meteor streams, the hydrocarbons was the oil, which we have plenty on this Earth. And by the way, it's my contention that oil is not a byproduct of plant life. It is a byproduct of being involved in interactions with comets, because that's where the hydrocarbons are in abundance. Where were the fern forests that grew under the oceans? There couldn't be any. Where did the salt come from that are in the oceans? It came from outside. Where did the water come from that pumped up that storm on November 9th last year in the central US? It came from outside. There's a guy named Lou Frank who was laughed at, was not allowed to put his instruments on one of the UV explorers, and that's the UV is one of the primary ways we view water on this planet from outside. And he knew from one of the early UV explorer satellites that he was seeing water traces in the upper atmosphere. And he made a suggestion that little comets were coming in and melting as they came in. And he was laughed at, so they wouldn't let him put an instrument on the next one. And somehow he snuck an instrument onto one of those satellites, and it got up there. And he actually made the readings, and sure enough, water is coming into our upper atmosphere, and they don't understand what the process is. Well, the process is we are a comet too. We are in the solar capacitor, and we discharge it just like comets do. The reason we don't discharge it to this level is because we're in a nice circular orbit. But when the comets come in on elliptical orbits, they're breaking in perpendicular to the field lines, just like the bug is in the bug zapper, and they're causing a very large cometary reaction. And so Venus, Velikovsky's Venus, as it came into the solar system, and its orbit became circularized and interacted with Earth and the other planets. We know it interacted with Mars. Its orbit became circularized. It interacted with Earth on 2 occasions 57 years apart. We know that from the Mayan calendar. The Mayans structured their calendar partly on Venus. One of the wheels in the Mayan calendar is Venus. And so when all of these cycle up and people talk about the end of the Mayan calendar in 2012, that's simply the end of all of the rotations of all the wheels in the Mayan calendar. It doesn't mean it's the end of the Earth, and the Mayans knew better than anybody that these are the lawless ones. They don't follow regular patterns. They knew that. So at any rate, this is a big comet. That's what it looks like. It's a high energy object. And if we would have been caught in one of those, or if we have the misfortune to be caught in the tentacle arms of one of these big comets that pass through, then we're in big trouble. Now, astronomers may counter that and say that Earth passed through the tail of Halley's Comet in 1910 and nothing happened. Halley's Comet is a little teeny nothing compared to this. And no, nothing happened. I bet if we had good instruments back then, we would have seen water influx into Earth for the time that Halley's was passing by. But not enough to get excited about. You probably wouldn't have been able to draw more than a few glasses of water out of it. These are big comets. They're different. They're high energy. They're very powerful. Jupiter. I want to equate this to something I'm going to talk about a little later, and that is Earth weather. You see all the bands? These are counter-rotating bands around Jupiter. And they're driven not by solar light power. They're driven by electrical currents. These are highly electrical currents, and the ion belts alternate, positive, negative, and that's why they're different colors, because the positive ions congregate in one band, negative ions congregate in another band, and they counter-rotate, but all to produce a magnetic field that is aligned with the axis of rotation. Jupiter is nothing more than a big gas ball. And so when Schumacher-Levy 9 with its 7 pieces crashed into Jupiter back in the 90s, I forget the date, NASA said, don't even look at it. We don't even have a telescope pointed that direction, because they were going to hit on the far side of Jupiter. And they said, when that thing comes around, you won't see anything, because those are just going to penetrate down into the atmosphere and be done with, not going to see anything. Well, the Russians knew better. They had every instrument they had trained on there, and the explosions, when those objects got close to, they didn't quite hit yet, while they were still up above the Jovian atmosphere, they exploded with more energy than all the nuclear bombs on Earth put together. Not a dirty snowball. By the way, the Russians are still underground teaching my material over there. They basically were threatened with being cut off from Western funding if they kept teaching my material over there. So it's still being taught, but not in the forefront like it was in the 90s. But now let's look at the red spot. It's a hurricane. Why does that hurricane keep moving around Jupiter? We know it's been there since Galileo looked 300 years ago. The reason is there is no land mass to stop it. Now, I want to ask you, does this make sense? When a hurricane comes into Florida or our East Coast or the Antilles Islands, and it starts to diminish in energy as it approaches land, is it because that big storm hits a few trees and it slows it down? I doubt it. What happens is that storm is electrically shorted out to Earth. That's why we don't have the big storms over the planet, the land masses of Earth. And that's why there's only a few locations out in the oceans where these form. Now, the Jupiter, which was up there a minute ago, has ion belts. And the point I want to make here is that I now know, and it's very clear, that the weather systems on the surface of the planet are driven by currents from the ionosphere tapping down through the cloud system to the surface of the Earth. And when they're over the ocean, what happens is there's no electrical contact, so basically what happens is it ionizes the air at the surface, it comes rushing in from all around, and it comes up a vortex. Tornadoes, hurricanes, cyclones, that's how they form. So they're an electrically driven phenomenon. It has nothing to do with the sun's light. It has nothing to do with salt content in the ocean. We've seen hurricanes, one come in, and we'll see one in a photograph here in a minute, where one hurricane came in right on the tail of Floyd and was equal in size. So if Floyd drained all the heat energy out of the ocean, how could you have another hurricane right on its heels? You couldn't have it happen if that's how hurricanes form. I have a picture here, and I don't have this on a slide, I didn't have time, but it's a hurricane on Mars, so big that we could see it from Earth with a small telescope. There ain't no oceans on Mars. Hurricane phenomena have nothing to do with the oceans. What it has to do with is the fact that the electron belt, the center current belt around our planet up in the ionosphere is driving those storms. Okay? Now, let's go back to comets. What are the Earth changes that we're going to see if a large comet, Planet X object, comes into the solar system? If it comes close enough, we could see the pole shifts, the gravitational pole shifts. It has nothing to do with magnetic fields. There is no such thing as a magnetic flip due to the physical flip of the Earth. Our magnetic structure in the core, in the surface of the Earth, is very faint, and it's very loosely bound, and it would not act as a little bar magnet like you'd play with when you were a kid. Absolutely false information that's being propagated on the internet. The only type of pole shifts, physical pole shifts, that would occur are due to gravitational effects, and those are explained, like I say, in my new pamphlet, where I talk about recalendering after those pole shifts. And that's all of the races that survived after the last pole shift, which was 3,600 years ago, the Mayans, the Zimbabwe solar site. I actually quote solar sites in there where they're rebuilding calendars, and you can see that they were rebuilding the calendar, and in fact, they all tracked the planet Venus. Now, why would you use Venus? Because Venus, they were very afraid of it. You look in all the old legends, and this is what Velikovsky is all about. Velikovsky isn't about astronomy or bad astronomy. Velikovsky is about, he started out studying calendars. One of the most complex topics on this planet has to deal with calendars, because we know the calendars were all goofed up about 1,600 years ago, 1600 BC. So Velikovsky set out to realign the calendars of the world, and what he noticed is at that time, 1600 BC, everybody was working feverishly around the world to rebuild the calendar. And the number of days in the year changed. The whole solar cycle of the calendar had changed. This could not happen by an impact of an asteroid. Absolutely, the effects that we see, the Earth changes that we see could not possibly happen with a collision of an asteroid. When in the first Gulf War, Carl Sagan went on TV and he said, if they burn those oil fields, they're going to cover the Earth and we're all going to die of starvation in the next 2 years. And 5, not 1, but 5 military think tanks worked on the problem, and they got on TV the same night. I saw it on Ted Koppel, and they said, no, it's going to be a local event. Said any of these events, even if they are big and major, the fallout drops out very quickly locally and does not go around the planet, like you're saying. Well, they burned the oil fields, and you know what? It was a local pollution event. And so I know, I've heard the statement, and we've all heard it, that the dinosaurs met their demise because we see a layer of iridium all over the planet. Well, my contention is that that could not be caused by a single strike of a comet. That the end result is that it was a layering of Earth in a very powerful cometary encounter where we were involved. When we become involved with these comets, we become a comet. We become part of them. And we become part of their comet tail, and it becomes part of us. So when you look at the Earth changes that could happen if we are involved in an encounter with a large comet, that could be anything from a distant encounter where the sun is just sending out flares and causing us problems, all the way up to a close encounter where our poles are flipped, the Earth is made almost uninhabitable. We know that Venus, according to the ancients, came by Mars and literally lifted its oceans and atmosphere off Mars. Now, when you look at Mars today, it has some interesting characteristics. All of the cratering is on the highlands. There's no cratering on the lowlands where the oceans used to be. Why? Because they were all eroded away because it was under the ocean. There are rivers and streams on Mars which are in pristine condition. We know there are tremendous windstorms all over Mars every year that would erode those geological features overnight. They're pristine. They're actually like the day they were left. And this was not geologically a long time ago. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at this data and say, something happened to Mars. And now NASA is saying, gee, we think we discovered this as permafrost under the ground. Well, do you think all those oceans just sank into the ground all of a sudden after being there for millions of years? I don't think so. It was lifted off. And what about the atmosphere that was required to hold that ocean in place? You cannot have an ocean without a significant atmosphere because it would just evaporate away very quickly. So you needed a significant atmosphere. What happened to the atmosphere, NASA? Where did that go? The answer is it was pulled off. It was pulled off recently. The data is unequivocal. And the ancients talk about this. They talk about the serpent attaching to Mars an electrical connection, and when that electrical connection went out, the auroras around the upper atmosphere of Mars were so intense that it looked like a snake grabbing Mars like this, and they could see the oceans coming off, being sucked into the comet. And the reason that happened, now a very interesting point here, is that Venus was slightly larger than Mars. Its surface gravity, once the electrical connection was made, was slightly larger than that of Mars, and Venus won the tug of war over the atmosphere. When Venus came by Earth, we were slightly larger than Venus, so we won the tug of war, and we had a vast pollution event. That's how these things work. So, at any rate, let me go back to slides, please. Okay, I'm going to whip through these quickly, hopefully. Oh, here's our friend Floyd, the leading hurricane. How many hurricanes do you count there? Floyd is the big one. There's actually two, that upper one just up to the right, there's actually two hurricanes that have just joined together there. And then there's the one down on the right, and I forget the name of that one, but that's following right in the path of Floyd on the exact same ocean. And then there is, oops, they got me in a way, but there's another one forming off of Africa right there. There we go, thank you. Right there. And so ultimately 1, 2, 3, 4 hurricanes at that one time, and then there's other activity around Central America there. But at any rate, Floyd was one of the biggest hurricanes going. And definitely not, those formed, like I said, September 6th at the alignment, that planetary electrical alignment. I predicted that in May of that year. And then, since then, by the way, I've done a lot of weather predictions, all of them hitting right on. There have been some other comets that have been given us some very interesting alignments. And one that I missed was that Venus new moon alignment of November 9th. This is a picture a friend of mine took. It's of downtown Minneapolis back in the 80s, and it made the cover of a few magazines. It's an electrical discharge, a lightning bolt, from an average summer thunderstorm. It's in both of my books. It's on the cover of the second pamphlet, Surviving Planet X Passage. But I want you to take a little look at that. Now that's an average thunderstorm lightning bolt. And if you can imagine a lightning bolt that's coming in from a comet that is highly charged, way more than this little summer thunderstorm, you would see that building disintegrate. It would leave a gaping hole in the ground, and we see these marks on planets. Mars has 3 volcanoes right in a row, Olympus Mons, and there's 2 other smaller ones, that are burned, clearly are burned right in there, in the surface of the planet. There's other marks. There's a lot of belief by some people that the Grand Canyon could not possibly have been formed by water erosion, that some other process of either a gravitational ripping of the surface of the planet, just like the big canyon, Valles Marineris on Mars is the big valley on Mars that it just shows like you can see it from Earth, it's just like the planet was ripped apart. At any rate, the point is that one of the Earth changes you may see if there is such a Planet X object encounter is the electrical discharges between the planets. And you would start to see these early. Somebody asked about the timing. I've written a 12-month scenario, and it's in my new book. I included it so that people would understand what the 12 months prior to a Planet X encounter would be like. It's not going to be the day we wait up and have a party till the day it happens and then it's going to go by. We are seeing right now what the Hopi Indians call the 7 layers, the 7 changes in the Earth change system. And I find it interesting as long as I'm talking about the Hopi Indian legends. I listened to Art Bell one night, and I believe it was Robert Ghostwolf was on, and he was talking about the Earth changes and going back, and he just says so matter-of-factly, and he says, yes, and of course it's the comets that cause it, and we know that it's the blue comets that are the dangerous ones. And I, of course, I deal with comets, so I just about fell off my chair because I had not heard that before. And it struck me, well, sure, the blue comets are like a neon bulb. They're so electrically charged, the current through them is so intense that they literally light up like a light bulb. And what color? Blue is what we see. There's a lot of UV, X-rays in there, things that we don't see with our eyes, but what would you see? Blue. Our sun is yellow. They didn't say it was yellow. The yellow ones are the dangerous ones. In fact, the sun is at 6,000 degrees. These things get so hot, they're blue. So there's a lot of energy going through them, and that's what caused and triggered the Earth changes that they detected. And we see this all over the world. To deny the ancients telling us from every corner of this planet that this is what the comets are the ones that caused this, and they don't hit us, they go by. And going by is what causes the problems. Every culture on this planet has handed us the same story. Slide, please. Thank you. This is a picture of it's NGC 1365, a barred galaxy. I want you to look at the symmetry here. Take the center and go out, draw a line out any way you would like. Draw a line through there and look at the far side structure on both sides. The only way a galaxy could form is if it formed in the center and threw this material out. One of my early papers dealt with galactic formation, and one of the main arguments for believing that model is the symmetry. You look at thousands and thousands of galaxies, weird shapes, warp disks, everything under the sun, multiple arms. What you find is amazing symmetry. Now, did that arm down there know what that arm up there was doing? I don't think so. The only way they could have formed in the same manner is if the same process were going on at the center when these were formed and thrown out into space. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, one of the main results of this model of forming a galaxy is that when this spray of stuff comes out from the nucleus of the galaxy and is thrown out into that arm to develop into stars and all this matter that's forming. What happens, and the Russians have done extensive statistical studies on this, what happens is that the bigger things start orbiting each other and they start throwing the little things out. They don't coalesce in a nice pattern, because this is like, it's like, I call it the shotgun effect. You shoot out and all of these things start orbiting each other. The little ones get thrown out and usually the big ones are left. And you might have a third one that's way out there that acts almost like a twin star in that these two look like one to that one. So those are the type of triple stars we have in existence. Other than that, 75% of all the stars in the sky are in double systems. A few are in triple systems, and we know that most of those other 25% are double stars, but the companion is unlit because we can see the main star wobbling back and forth. So how did the solar system form? They all formed, all the planets in our solar system, all the moons in our solar system, all the comets, all the asteroids, everything we see was captured. And if you take that model and do a statistical analysis on it over a long period of time, given the random size distribution of objects floating around outer space, what you get is our solar system. All different ages. So this idea that something random is going to come in from outside and come into this solar system is the way it works. This is the norm. This is not unusual. This is the way it works. And you find that the thing I find amazing is that you could have all of this without biological life of any form. We are the smallest, most insignificant amount of matter in the universe in terms of quantity. So whoever created all this put us here for a reason, I think, and organized these molecules so that we could think and talk and decide what we were going to do with our lives, et cetera. And the thing that I want to point out here, there's a chapter in both of my books. It's called Will Man Survive? And ultimately, there are three main things that have to become self-evident as a race civilization evolves to where we are. First of all, we cannot spend all our resources and time fighting petty wars and arguing amongst ourselves, because we have a limited time window to get off this planet and get out there and live in peace. The other thing is, the people that have already realized that and gone out there and are living out there, no way in the world or in the universe are they going to let us off this planet if this is what we're doing. I guess a few people agree. So, at any rate, I'm seeing the light flash here that my time is up, and they're going to run out here with a hook in a minute, but I think that's a good place to end. And do we have time for a couple questions? No questions. You got to go to lunch, which is good. So talk to us. We'll be here all week.
And so there you go. There's a video, and I'll continue to do this in the future. I hope this is informative. I hope you like these old videos. It gives you a little bit of a refreshment from dealing with all of the topics that we have going on today in the world. Science, unfortunately, has not changed the scientific industry to adapt these really correct ideas, and it's absolutely absurd. So, and that's because it's all about money, and I think the only way to get rid of this is to completely flush out NASA and flush out the money that goes into universities. That's the only way change is going to come about.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern.